Hi, this is Lay with Crashtesthobby, showing you how to finish your plane. The motor and prop you choose will determine if you get high power or long flights. The motor mount we provide with the kit can carry a variety of motors, so try a few and see what you like best. Mark the motor mount on the Formica plate. You'll notice I drill the corner holes just through the bottom plate, where I put 8 or number 6 screws. But the center hole I drilled all the way through so that if I want, I can put a bolt through and bolt it through the top plate on the top of the wing. Lay out your radio. Make sure all your wires will reach. At this time, it's a good thing to double check your center of gravity. Since the center of gravity is on the spar, anything ahead of the spar is going to help to shift the weight forward. Anything behind will shift the weight back. Mark your servos and then use an X-Acto knife or razor blade to cut the laminate and the tape. And then use a soldering iron or a box knife and start cutting down one layer at a time through the EPP foam. Use needle nose pliers to remove the pieces of foam and test to make sure that your servo is tight. The servo actually becomes part of the body of the plane if it's fit in very tightly. Then I'm cutting another layer to get the servo deep enough. I want the servo so that only the servo arm is above the top of the wing, that the entire servo body is below that level so that it doesn't disrupt the air flowing over the wing. The servo has tabs on each end that are used in some applications to put screws through and tie the servo down. That also has to be accounted for when you cut the foam out so that that part is below the surface of the foam. Now the servo is sitting deep enough that it won't disrupt airflow except for the servo arm. Let's do the other side. And then removing the tape and laminate on each side, I then melt down a little bit so it will fit down. The push rod should not be at the outside edge of the servo arm or you'll have too much movement in the elevons. You want the push rod about halfway out. You also want to put it one click forward so that it will give you better axle rolls. Go in and mark and cut where your horns will be installed in the elevons. Push the horn up through and make sure that the horn is pointing directly at the servo. I then take my soldering iron and punch a hole in the middle of that slit that's for the horn, and this is so glue can flow up around the horn and glue it tightly into the elevon. Now pushing the horn to one side, I force glue up around it and put glue on top. This is an important bond because it's how your radio is going to talk to your plane. I'm forcing glue up through, then putting some glue around the top side and then making sure that that horn is pointing directly at the servo. We're going to now install the easy connector. I drilled it out with a 1/16 inch bit. Then I slide the easy connector down the wire and snap it into place in the top hole of the horn. If you put it in lower horns, you lose your leverage. You want as much leverage on this as you can get. Doing it on the same thing on the other side, clip it into place in the top hole. We're now going to cut out the battery slot. Using a razor blade, I split the laminate and the tape. I position the battery so that it's back about a 1/2 inch behind the spars so that it won't damage the spar or bend the battery if in a collision. In this particular case, the battery is back 2 inches. And once again, you want it to fit tight. You want the battery to be a solid part of the plane. It adds strength when you cut the slot exactly the same size as the battery. I'm cutting relief cuts here so that I can then pull out the pieces of foam. Now this battery is so big that I have to lay it on its side. Battery is stronger and less likely to be damaged if it can be set on its edge with a side facing forward rather than an edge facing forward. Now you can see I'm trying to fit an old battery in there that appears to be slightly puffed. That battery needs to be retired. But then cutting down another layer to make the slot deep enough that the battery isn't above the surface of the wing. Using a screwdriver, I scrape out the battery slot. Now we're cutting the laminate where we're going to install the receiver and the speed control. This cut needs to be about at least 6 inches long and 1/2 inch wide. And it has to be fairly deep because we're going to stand the speed control on its side. I use a metal straight edge as I'm cutting so that I don't over melt on the laminate and the tape that's along the top edge here. And I'm going to cut clear through the foam, clear to where you can see the tape and laminate on the bottom of the wing, but I'm not going to damage those things. Then using a screwdriver I scrape it out. Speed control fits in tightly, and so does the receiver. You'll notice that on my receiver I also have a satellite receiver to increase range. To bring the wires from the servo in, I put a slit between the servo box and the slot for the radio, and then just run the wires, and I store excess wire in that slot. Let's do the other side. Cut a little deeper so that it fits to the angle of the servo, and then press the receiver in. And that's the satellite receiver, you can see there. We're now going to bind the radio. I've put the binding plug in the receiver, and I'm holding the bind switch on my transmitter, and double check that my servos are working, and also with the reversing switches make sure they're going the right direction. I like to bring the control rod up through the bottom of the servo so it's closer to the wing of the plane. Then in the middle I punch a hole where I'm going to put a wire guide that keeps it from flexing, especially when you're getting down on your elevons. So gluing those in place and trimming the wire to length. Now I'm going to glue the servos in place. Don't fill the servo hole with glue and press the servo into it or you'll never get it out. I put a band of glue all the way around the top part of the servo, and if your hole was cut right, that servo should be almost as solid as the wing itself. We're going to install the fins. In the center of the fin, draw a line that marks the airfoil of the wing and cut about a 1-inch slot there. Since you need one for each side, make 2. And I put a piece of reinforced tape through it and apply goop to the end. The goop makes a more permanent attachment point. Some people don't use the goop, but then put a piece of tape up around the nose, and this helps to keep weeds from catching between the fin and the wing. We're now cutting slots for the Velcro to hold the battery in place. When the radio is close, like the receiver and the speed controller close to the battery, I often use the same piece of Velcro to hold those parts in. In this particular plane, where we've got a large space in between, I just use regular clear tape over the receiver and the speed control to hold them in place. I'm now cutting an air vent for the speed control because they do get hot in use, and this allows some airflow for heat to escape from the speed control. Don't go back and put a piece of clear tape over the top of that though, or you will have a difficult time ventilating. The bottom of the elevon should be aligned with the bottom of the wing. You should have a slight amount of up on both sides. This is called reflexing on all wings. Now remember that wings don't fly heavy. Make sure you use recommended CG locations. Make sure your elevons are moving in the right direction, and elevons should move about a ½ inch in each direction. Push rods should be at the top of the horns in the middle of the servo arms for best leverage. Also make sure you get a good launch. Don't frisbee toss it on takeoff. This is Lee with Crash Test Hobby. Thanks for watching, and thank you for buying and building our planes.